Okay, here we're just multiplying fractions together. So we don't really need the parentheses. Now, when you're multiplying fractions, you can go ahead and simplify up and down, and you can simplify diagonally. Now, the first part simplifies up and down, because when you look at the first fraction, what has more a's, the top or the bottom? Well, the bottom does. How many more a's? It has one. When you look at the b's, which one has more b's, the top or the bottom? Well, it's the bottom, and it has one more. When you look over here, the numbers in front don't simplify. There's no a's in the bottom, but there's b's. So what has more b's, the top or the bottom? The bottom does. It has three more. So now all we have to do is some more simplification. You'll notice you do have a 4 here and a 2 here. You can reduce that down, crossing the 2 out, crossing the 4 out, putting a 2. Here you have an a on the bottom. Here you have an a squared on the top. So you can cross that a out, leaving you with an a to the first in the top. So when you multiply, you have your 2 times your 5 times your a on top. You have your b and your b cubed on the bottom. Just multiply the top, multiply the bottom, and you're done. Over here, once again, it's all multiplication in the parentheses and between the parentheses, so we don't really need the parentheses. But we do have negative exponents. Remember, your negative exponent means the reciprocal, so you got to put it in the other part of the fraction. Because what we have here to begin with is really over 1, so that goes down to the bottom. Here, this is over 1, so your negative exponent part goes down to the bottom. Here, you're over 1, so your negative exponent part goes down to the bottom. And your 1/3 is really a 1 over 3, which puts a 3 in the bottom. Now, it's just a matter of multiplying fractions like we normally would. So, we can do some simplification. Here, you'll notice you have an x squared and an x cubed, so you can simplify those down. Your x squared drops, leaving you with an x to the first. Here you have your y's. A y cubed drops with this y to the fifth, making it a y squared. Your 3 and your 6 reduce down. So you have this. So you multiply the top, multiply the bottom, and you get your answer. Here, once again, multiplication between and in the parentheses, so parentheses aren't really needed. Multiply in any order you want, so put the numbers together, put the variables together, multiply the numbers. Then you want to multiply your variables, which means you got to add your exponents. A half plus 5 halves is 6 halves, which reduces down to 3. When you're working out this one here, you need to take the fourth root and then you need to cube it, or you need to cube it and then take the fourth root. Either one doesn't make a difference. I'm going to choose to take the fourth root. The fourth root is really the 1/4 power. It's still raised to the third power. So now I'm going to apply my 1/4 power to each thing on the inside. Well, 1 to the 1/4 is just a 1. Fourth root of 16 is a 2. Exponent raised to an exponent, so multiply your exponents, and you get 4 times 1/4 is 1. Here you got an exponent raised to an exponent. You multiply them, you get 2. So now you got to go ahead and apply that cubing to each one. So you apply that 3 to each one as an exponent. And so then we get a 1 on top, 2 cubed, which is 8, c cubed, exponent raised to an exponent, so you multiply those, so you get a d to the 6th. Here we need to rewrite this using exponents. So we're going to get this to begin with, and you might be wondering, well, where does that come from? Well, that comes from this one right here, which is a square root. So that's why the whole thing is raised to the 1/2. We then need to go ahead and deal with this root right here. That's just another square root, so that would be another 1/2 power, but only on the b on the inside. Here we need to do the reverse process and write it with a root. We have an exponent. Remember, it's a square root, and then you're cubing it. And whether you do the square root and then the cube, or the cube and then the square root, doesn't make a difference. Either way works out. If we do our cubing here, we get a 64x cubed. But this root does simplify. The square root of 64, you should know. Also, since we're dealing with square root, we're going to try to write our x cubed as something cubed times something else. So it's an x cubed times an x to the first, because remember, you'd have to add your exponents to be able to get your 3. Now you want to go ahead and take the square root of your 8 squared, square root of your x squared, square root of your x squared, or x, square root of the first part is 8, square root of x squared is x, because a square root undoes your squaring, and your square root of x at the end you can't do anything with. Here you have the square root of a fraction. Whenever you're dealing with square root of a fraction, you want to apply the root to the top and the bottom. Square root of the top is pretty easy to deal with. Square root of 7 doesn't simplify, but we don't like to leave roots in the bottom. Whenever you're dealing with roots, you never want to leave anything in the root that can be taken out. You never want to have a fraction inside of your root, and you never want to leave a root in the bottom. So we're going to have to take our problem and multiply by a special form of 1. Now, to get rid of the bottom, we want to end up getting the square root of a 7 squared, because you guys know the square root and your squaring undo each other. So you got to think, okay, root 7 times what gives me root 7 squared, and that's an additional root 7. So if you multiply the bottom by root 7, you got to also multiply the top by root 7. Now you multiply across, you get a 1 times your root 7 on top. So you get a root 7 on the top, your root and your squaring on the bottom undo each other, and you just have 7. Over here, you're dealing with a 4th root. On a problem we did similar to this, we wanted everything on the inside to be squared because we had a square root. But now we're dealing with a 4th root, so you want to rewrite everything on the inside as something to the 4th power. This would be 5 is bigger than 4, so it's an r to the 4th, but times r to the what power? In this case, it's 1 because you'd have to add your exponents to get your 5. Then that's bigger, so you know it's an s to the 4th times what? Well, you've got to add, so it's another s to the 4th. So then you want to go ahead and simplify each part, applying your root to each part. You get a 3 there, an r to the 4th, 4th root of r you can't do anything with, an s and an s, which simplifies down to this here. Once again, we have a square root of a fraction, so you apply the root to the top, root to the bottom. Now we want to go ahead and work with the bottom. The bottom does simplify. You'll notice you have an x cubed, which is an x squared times an x. That x squared you can pull out in front, because the square root of your x squared is that x in front. Our 3, our x, and our y we didn't do anything with, so they're left there. So we have our problem here, but we don't want to leave a root in the bottom. So then you get to multiply by a special form of 1. You want to try to get that root out of the bottom. You want to end up with this on the bottom. You want to get a 3 squared, an x squared, and a y squared, because your square root will drop those out. So you got to ask yourself, okay, a 3 times what is a 3 squared? Well, that's a 3. X times what is x squared? That's an x. Y times y is a y squared. And if you do that to the bottom, you can also do that to the top. Multiply the top, and you get this here. Now, when you're looking at the bottom, that square root undoes all those squarings. And so we get this for your final answer. Over here, we have the square root of a fraction again. However, this fraction does simplify, so I'm going to simplify it first. Now, you notice your 3 and your 9 reduced down to a 3. Your x to the 11th, x squared is 9 more x's on the top. Square root of a fraction, apply the root to the top and the bottom. We want to end up getting a 5th root of a 3 to the 5th because we're dealing with the 5th root. So you got to have a 3 to the 4th here on the top and the bottom. So when you multiply the top, you get this, your 81s from your 3 to the 4th. The bottom then just is your 3. Now you got to ask yourself, does this simplify? Well, yes, you have an x to the 9th, which is bigger than your 5th power in front. So you can write your x to the 9th as an x to the 5th and an x to the 4th. Pull that x to the 5th out, and then you're left with just your 81, your x to the 4th, and your x cubed, or y cubed.